Hello and welcome back to the second Council Watch video in a week. I didn't expect to make this one because the meeting that I'm going to be talking about is the Finance and Governance meeting, which is notoriously boring and often talks about things to great detail that are really not that exciting, but in fairness, quite important. But I'm going to cover this meeting in reverse because one little item at the end of the agenda, 123.5 in actual fact, the council have been sent a questionnaire to fill in. And so basically the idea is they're going to fill this questionnaire in and then their completed questionnaire will go to full council for approval. And the questionnaire is all about themselves. Yeah, to make a recommendation to full council on a response to the consultation on strengthening the standards and conduct framework for local authorities in England. And roughly translated, it's all about what to do when councillors behave badly. Now, you can behave badly by just being a bit silly. You can behave badly by saying things you shouldn't say. You can actually behave badly by not following the rules of the council, hence all that stuff at the start of every meeting about, members have to identify any interest they've got in the things that are going to be discussed. So if you mess up on that one, you really need to have some sort of list of what can happen if you mess up. And the thing that surprised me is that if councillors mess up and behave really badly, then at one end, I guess they could discover it's a criminal thing and they could be put in prison, I guess. But if it's something far less serious than that, then there's not really any powers to do anything about it. As you'll discover in what comes later, even suspending a councillor is a problem. It's very difficult to do. The councillors themselves, quite rightly, are a little bit miffed with the existing system because let's say, for argument's sake, that I made a complaint about a councillor. I don't have any rules to follow. I can say what I like. I can actually complain. I can use any evidence I've got. I can sort of cite whatever rules I think they've broken. And pretty much, I'm in the clear. I can say whatever I want. As long as the normal laws are not broken, in terms of slander and sort of stuff like that. But the councillors can't answer. It's quite likely if I say to somebody, you said this and you didn't do this, blah 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 blah, then even if they've got a good reason for doing it, that might be one of those things they've spoken about in the confidential sessions. I'm not allowed to know that, so they're not allowed to defend themselves against people like me because the rules don't permit it. So it is a bit lopsided. Andy does mention this actually in the meeting, that the councillors have sort of got one hand tied behind their back when it comes to disputes. Someone can complain about them, but they just cannot answer it properly because to do so would break some of their rules. So it is a bit of a mess, I think, and perhaps it does need reviewing. But the problem is, filling in the questionnaire reveals that they all think differently. One of the questions goes along the lines of, if measures were put in place to allow a councillor to be suspended, how long should it be for? A year, 6 months, an arbitrary number of months, or shouldn't it be allowed at all? Or the usual answer at the end, we don't know. So I thought this could be a bit interesting, and it was. And it was also quite bad-tempered because pretty much they couldn't agree. So anyway, let's start with this bit.
Option 2 is yes. However, the government should set a different maximum length in months, but then we need to put a maximum figure in months in the box. So what are you suggesting? 12 months maximum?
I suggest 12.
Okay. Right, are you going to propose it? Right, Wendy.
I'm very much, I find it kind of, Neil's use of the word behaviour worries me because we're not talking about behaviour as such. We're talking serious code of conduct, which is really basically bordering on crime. Usually, we're not talking about petty squabbles or somebody getting up your nose. We're talking about something, serious that you wouldn't go for suspension because somebody shouts. You go for suspension because somebody is basically crooked or breaking equality laws time and time again.
I think most people that watch these videos know exactly what bad behaviour is actually all about. And I have to say, some members of the council behave impeccably. Some never cause any trouble. Some never say anything at all that's nasty or vindictive. Other people do from time to time when they get passionate about something and lose their temper. And people do shout and yell and moan and groan. And when it's serious, then at some stage, some mechanism should kick in that says, you can't do this. There's got to be a mechanism that stops people bullying, yelling, shouting, swearing, whatever they want to do. We're not talking about breaking legal rules here. We're talking about they're our representatives and we expect them to behave properly.
I don't like to use I don't like to use the word maximum. Yes, it should set a maximum length so that you can't actually. I think if you've got to suspend somebody for longer than 6 months, you're basically looking to get rid of them altogether. So maybe a maximum suspension of 6 months, because after that, if you've got to use the maximum to suspend somebody, and then maybe other things kick in.
Right. So
I'm kind of like, I don't think saying 9 months or a year makes any difference. It's the suspension that's important.
it's an option that we have, Wendy.
Yeah.
If we believe that the government should, if the government reintroduced the power of suspension. So first of all, we're not being asked whether we agree with suspension or not. We're being asked that if the government reintroduced the power of suspension, do we think there should be a maximum length of suspension? It's either yes, 6 months, yes, but specify the maximum, no or unsure.
Chair, point of order, can I extend standing order?
Yes, but I don't want to keep coming back and having to re-explain this question. Okay, so I propose. Right, you're going to propose
15 minutes.
Okay, right.
And that was about making sure they don't run out of time. So they've had to sort of have a little vote to extend the meeting. You have to do that. Standing orders.
Second? Yeah. All in favour? Yeah. Please. Right. So do we understand the question?
Yes.
Right. So we have one saying 6 months,
Graham's
one
made a
saying
proposal.
12 months. So
Graham made
is
a
someone going to second one of those proposals? Because they're conflicting proposals at the moment.
Chair, I think there is a point in this that we're looking at, is that actually 6 months has probably been raised because that is the maximum length of time that a councillor can go without attending a meeting.
Yes, and it's
So-
also been clarified that if a councillor was suspended for 6 months, it wouldn't count towards a disqualification.
It hasn't actually been clarified because that hasn't actually been done into on what happens.
Right,
It's mentioned that it could be.
It was clarified that if it came in, that would be the basis on which it would envisage that it would work.
It's only the envisaged, Chair.
Right, then we are considering what is being proposed. Okay, that is what we are being asked to consider. That if there was a suspension of 6 months, it would not count towards a councillor's disqualification because their absence from meetings would be enforced. If it comes out and says something different, it comes out and it says something different. But this paper suggested that that is the way it would work, and that is the way we are being asked to consider it. Okay, Wendy.
I think we have to look at these as a whole. This is one bit of a whole, so we'll be asked lots of different questions. Personally, I think that if the government set a maximum length of suspension of 6 months, if we actually councillors could be suspended, that would be an enormous step forward. So I think a year is ridiculous, because if you're suspended for a year, what is to be gained by suspending somebody for a year? And then what are they supposed to be doing? Going off on retreat and learning to mend their ways?
Right. I'm going to stop it here, right? Because
Andy's nearly at boiling point now. It gets worse.
we are dancing round and round this question without coming to the point.
Well, mine was, I said
Yeah.
yes for the first one. That's fine with
This
me.
question starts with the premise that the government reintroduces suspension, right?
Yeah.
It's not asking us for our thoughts on suspension. It's saying if it was reintroduced, do we think there should be a maximum? We have 4 possible answers. All right?
But I proposed the first
Right,
one,
I know
yes.
you did, Wendy.
Let's get on then and
Well,
let's see.
Wendy, I'm trying. Okay, we've had 2 conflicting proposals at the moment, neither of which has been seconded.
So let's see.
Right, no, I'm going to finish summarising the position.
Oh, again.
Well, Wendy,
This should have actually been stopped before it got this bad, because you've now got people losing their temper, you've got people showing signs of distress, you've also got a lot of people sitting around the table not really knowing what on earth to say. So are they not demonstrating exactly the sort of behaviour that this questionnaire is meant to be stamping out?
We know what the position.
Wendy, will you let me finish? Because you keep saying you'll know the position and then you keep repeating something that the question isn't asking. The first option is yes, maximum 6 months. That's Wendy's position. The second option is yes, but with a free format figure on the maximum. That's Graham's option, who suggested 12. The third option is no, and the fourth option is unsure. We have 2 proposals on the table, both conflicting, neither of which has been seconded. Would someone like to second one or the other?
That's what I put my hand up for.
Well,
Chair.
fine, but that isn't what you said previously, Neil. So we now need to have a resolution.
In that case, Chair, I withdraw my second because I'm not actually going to be bullied in that way here. Thank you very much.
You're not being bullied, Neil.
You are
no,
actually, Andy.
No,
I'm
you're
sorry.
not, Neil. You have given your opinion on how this should work in your previous statement, neither of which options are available to us.
So now we've got people removing their second because they're being bullied. Now, I'm going to leave it up to you all watching this video to decide if that was bullying or not. I know exactly what I think.
So we are being asked to consider 4 possible options. Is anybody willing to second one of the 2 proposals that have been made?
That was what I was going to do, Chair. But you obviously made comments about what I'm thinking,
Right.
and that's what you actually complained about earlier.
I didn't complain about anything, Rick, but in your preceding comment, you expressed a view on how this would work. That is not one of the 4 options that we have in front of us.
I was going to actually second Councillor Brooks's proposal.
Right, then you withdrew it. Are you re-seconding it?
Please.
Councillor Blowers did have his hand up.
Yeah.
Connor?
I was going to say, Chair, that as we've got 2 different answers, why don't we just put unsure?
Because we go to the vote, there's a proposal. If you want to make the proposal of unsure, then that's your proposal. So
Okay.
we would go to second it.
Okay, I'll propose that then, Chair. We go
You
to
have
unsure.
And there we go. The newest member on the council came up with the very obvious answer. They can't agree, so we're unsure. Tick.
What are you proposing?
I propose we go to unsure.
Okay, I'll second. Unsure as a response. Right, all in favour, please.
Of what?
Unsure.
Is answering unsure? Yeah, because we...
I know the reasons, let's just vote.
Right, okay. We have conflicting proposals, basically, none of which have been seconded. Right, so that's 3. Against? 1 against. Abstentions?
Sorry, Chair, I will vote for because I didn't hear you say it.
Right, I'll call the vote again then. So the proposal is that we answer unsure. All in favour, please. So that's 4. Against?
1.
Abstentions? There you go. Carried. Right. 22. If yes, well, we haven't answered yes, have
So we
we?
can skip it.
So that's not applicable.
Before all that happened, we need to go back to the start of the meeting because there was an agenda item that was a bit unusual. To review decisions of the meeting of the 13th of January 2025, the sponsorship to Suffolk Sober Spaces and the grant to music prescription. Now, if you don't understand how these things work, if you actually have sponsorship, that means that you think that something is a really worthy cause and you agree to sponsor it for so much money, usually every year, and that carries on till it's stopped. On the other hand, you have a grant, which is a sum of money which is applied for, and if approved, they get given the sum of money. Different thing, it's a one-off thing. Well, both of these things are actually quite worthy organisations, and I don't think anybody at the meeting was remotely sort of thinking that there was, they shouldn't have had the money. In actual fact, I definitely got the impression that everybody thought that they were worthy causes. Suffolk Sober Spaces, basically an organisation that uses music to promote well-being. So, people go and play music, sort of open mic nights, that sort of thing, where musicians or people who would like to be musicians get together, perhaps learn how to play the guitar or keyboard or something like that, and then do a bit of performance and stuff. But there's no booze. It's a sober space. So, teas, coffees, that sort of stuff, but no alcohol, no drugs, that sort of thing. And music is often used for that sort of purpose, and pretty much it works really, really well. So those things are a definite advantage for the council to sponsor. And then the other one, which is music prescription, same sort of thing, gets people together, does things. And those two organisations, although they're separate, they do actually have some links, because obviously to put events on, you need musicians, you get the musicians from somewhere else, and it's a bit of a sort of two-group basis, but they help each other out. But they are, from what I can gather, totally independent, and I think worthy of the money. So what's this thing about reviewing it? Well, there was a bit of a sort of hiccup. Now, what seems to have happened is that one of those groups, after they got their money, had one of the Lowestoft Town councillors volunteer to sort of look after their books, if I've read it right. Just to sort of, help them do the minutes for meetings and things, because obviously if you've had public money, you've got to have a bit of formality. So there needs to be sort of minutes and meetings and sort of mini Lowestoft Council meetings, really. So it's recorded what they did, what they got, what the money for, how the money was spent, how successful a certain event was, and all that sort of stuff. And to newcomers to meetings, that's a bit complicated. So one of the Lowestoft Town Council members volunteered just to sort of keep the minutes for them. Unfortunately, in their new minutes, they actually wrote that that councillor was now the secretary. And that councillor wasn't the secretary. Because if the council had just given someone the sponsorship, it would be quite unethical to actually have that sort of conflict of interest, where they got the money from the council and one of the council people sits on their committees and has some sort of power, perhaps, over how the money's spent. And so you can imagine the sort of potential dangers in that sort of arrangement. So the acting town clerk was in touch with the organisation, and they were reassured eventually that it was just a mistake and the minutes were wrong, and that person had never volunteered to be the secretary. They'd just volunteered to do some sort of secretarial duties. I think that's probably the best way of putting it. Well, of course, what that means is that while they discuss it, that particular councillor can't be in the meeting, for the confidentiality rules that they've got between themselves. So if there's a conflict of interest, which clearly there was, that person has to go out of the room. And so the rest of them were talking about that councillor. So it was a real mess, really, to be honest. It got resolved nicely because nobody disagreed in what was actually the destination of the funds. It was a good project, but unfortunately, due to sort of just human error, it got rather messed up, which made it rather difficult for the town clerk to sort of make sure things were officially above board with all sort of knots tied. They got there in the end, and I'm not going to subject you to that because it was extremely complicated and very, very confusing. But again, it just means that councillors themselves have got to be very careful how they present themselves, and make sure that the people they're actually doing things for understand how it works. Now, clearly in this example, they didn't understand, and they didn't really understand the implication of just putting somebody down on a form as a secretary when they weren't. You know, I mean, I think I probably would have done that in the past myself, you know, but these things matter. And by doing that, it made it extremely difficult for that particular councillor, because it was such a tricky thing to navigate when that particular person can't even speak for themselves because of their rules. You know, they want to sort of stick up for themselves, but they have to go out of the room. So council rules are extremely odd in that sort of respect. So the person sort of singled out has no right of reply, in effect, and also doesn't know what their people are doing in the meeting that they're not allowed to be sitting in. I have to say it was sort of resolved very amicably, and there was no problem whatsoever with these, particularly the grant that went to one of the organisations and the sponsorship that went to the other. They did talk about, you know, making sure that the sponsorship is renewed with discussion. So it did sort of raise that to the surface a bit. But I think the organisation were very pleased with the outcome. The council were pleased with the outcome. And we eventually got to the end. I just found it then very ironic that the next bit on the agenda was the councillors talking about their conduct. You know, because accidentally or not, you know, you can make mistakes. So finance and governance, well, normally a very dull meeting, but today it's been pretty interesting. So that's today finished, all sorted out, all organised. It was a bit grumpy, wasn't it? But there we go. That's just how it goes with Lowestoft Town Council. See you on the next video. Take care.